Hi there. This is Satan's Trilogy, Book 3, and Chapter 6. This is reading 102. I am the author and the narrator. So, sit back, relax, let the story unfold. The guest bedroom was large, much larger than Mary's room. Mary didn't like it because it was on the front of her apartment facing the parking lot. At times, the noise from outside was distracting. There was a large walk-in closet that was holding only a few clothes of Mary's. They took a look, turned her head to Esther and said, "Mary has a really nice apartment. She needs someone to share it with. I wonder if Mary has any family." Esther knew the history on Mary's family, but chose not to discuss it at the moment. Instead, Esther looked at Day and said, "Perhaps I can help Mary. I love her dearly. She is a good person that has helped many. I think it is time someone helps her." Day looked at Esther. She wasn't certain what Esther had in mind. Taking a look at her sister and trying to understand her remarks, she finally asked, "What are you thinking, Esther?" Esther jumped up on the large king-size bed, folded her legs under her, taking the same position as Day. She then explained, "I have always been focused on two things in life, my skills in fighting and my love of cooking." Esther looked at Day and took her hand, then looked Day in the eyes and explained, "I have the ability to see in the future. I don't have total control over this, but more often than not, I know how tomorrow will unfold." Day looked at Esther. "Tomorrow? Just how far in advance is tomorrow?" she asked. Esther smiled at her sister. "Well," said Esther, "sometimes several years. It varies." Day quickly took Esther's hands. "Can you see your death?" Esther grinned. "We all must die someday. I have seen my death." Day gripped Esther's hands even tighter and asked, "Promise me that when you are close to that time, you will tell me that you love me before it happens." Esther looked into her sister's eyes for a moment. "All right." Esther grinned and said, "It is a long time from now. We can't concern ourselves about the future. Let's focus on now." Esther gave a big smile, and Day responded in kind. Esther continued, "I will never fall in love, nor will I ever marry. Perhaps I can still have a child, though." Esther looked at Day and grinned in a most wonderful way. Day saw a different Esther at that moment. She appeared motherly, and this puzzled Day. Waiting a moment to comment, Day asked, "A child? What do you mean?" Esther continued to hold Day's hands and smiled as she started to give her details. "Some of my visions are of what could be and not necessarily of what will be. Mary can't carry a baby, but I can. With today's technology, I could carry Mary's baby for her." Esther said it and smiled. Her face had a hopeful expression of waiting and wanting approval from her sister. Day was stunned. She didn't immediately comment as she tried to focus all of what Esther had just suggested. Seeing Esther's hopeful expression that she would approve, Day spoke up. "I'll be an aunt." Day smiled, knowing that when and if she loses Esther, there would be a child that in a small way would be part of her. Esther broke into a big smile and said, "You would be an aunt, and I know you'll be a wonderful aunt." Esther looked pleased and said, I need to do my exercises. This is such a large room. I can do them in here. Do you mind? Day said of course not. Day grabbed a few pillows and made herself comfortable on the bed as Esther prepared for the night's exercise. Day sat against the bed's headboard with 2 pillows on her lap, and she watched Esther do her kata. The movements were quick and forceful, yet there was an elegance with every move that seemed to mimic ballet. Day had learned long ago not to watch Esther's arms, but instead to watch Esther's eyes. That is how you know where your opponent is going next, Esther had told Day. Esther finished and smiled at Day as she walked towards the bathroom, commenting to her, "You did well." Day felt really pleased that Esther had made such a comment. Jumping off the bed, Day quickly joined Esther in the shower. They washed each other's backs and then finished their showers and quickly stepped out to dry. They dressed with the nighties Mary had provided and jumped back into bed. Both girls sat up against the headboard. Esther was looking at her phone and Day was watching her. "Esther," said Day, "how many special functions does your phone do?" Esther laughed, then glanced at Day, sitting on her left. "My friend John keeps updating it for me. I have 18 functions at the moment programmed on the phone." Esther entered a series of numbers on the keypad, and the face of the phone split apart in the center, exposing a small screen. Speaking to the phone, Esther said, "Find John," and the screen lit up like a map, and a man's voice said an address. A red blinking dot on the screen was where John could be found. "Wow," said Day. "How many people can you locate?" Esther smiled. "Just my family, friends, and my dad's best friends. I guess that is around 60. Day said, "What else can it do?" "There's a tracker on my Ninja." Esther spoke to the phone. "Locate my Ninja." The screen quickly had a red dot flashing on the screen with an orange spot close by. Esther watched the screen, then quickly commented, "The red flashing dot is where my Ninja is, and the orange spot is someone looking at my bike." Suddenly, the orange spot was on top of the red dot. They nearly became one. Esther looked at Day. "Do you want to go outside with me and find out who's on my Ninja?" Before Esther could finish her question, Day had jumped up and was lacing up her shoes. Esther did the same, and they quickly walked out the apartment door, grabbing Mary's keys that she had dropped on the table as she walked in. Esther in long silk pajamas and Day wearing black silk and very gothic nighties quickly made their way to the front of the apartment complex where Esther's bike had been parked on the visitor space. The outside parking was more than adequate. The outside lighting was more than adequate for them to see a young man on the Ninja, and of course, he could see the girls. Both girls had slipped into one of Mary's jackets that were inside the front closet. Day had grabbed a black leather jacket, and Esther wore Mary's white silk jacket. Walking straight to the young man on the Ninja, Esther stopped on his left, while Day walked around him on the right. The young man appeared to be Korean and was smiling at the girls. Esther said to him, "Nice bike, is it yours?" The young man looked at Esther, took a long look at Day, and finally answered Esther, "I love cool-looking bikes. I'm just sitting on it." "Do you two live here?" he asked. Day quickly stated, "The bike belongs to my sister. Why are you sitting on it?" The young man had noticed that Day was Korean, glanced at Esther, and said to Day in Korean, "If she is your sister, I am a monkey's uncle." Esther saw that Day was becoming angry at the man's attitude, decided to defuse the situation, so Esther made her own comment in Korean to the young man. You should be careful how you judge people. You don't look like a monkey, but one never knows. Esther broke out laughing, and Day couldn't help but join in. The young man watched the two young girls wearing their nighttime clothes and joined in laughing too. I apologize, you are sisters. I love your bike and was tempted to sit on it. I didn't mean any harm, and I certainly didn't expect it would lead me to meeting two such lovely ladies. Esther and Day looked at each other. This guy was smooth, and he was easy on the eyes. They both then broke out laughing at his remarks and started to walk back to the apartment complex. Hey, wait, he said, I don't know your names. Day and Esther glanced at him and continued back to the apartment. Esther said to Day in a soft and low voice, I think he is rather cute, and I think that he took a special notice of you, Day. They gave Esther a squeeze as they walked together. I thought he was rather cute, too. If he is able to find me within a week, then I'll take a second look. Day then added, You know, Esther, I love the way things are, and men, they just complicate things. Esther pulled Day back to her side and commented, You're right, Day, but I have never known life to stay simple for very long. You and I can handle anything. Esther looked at Day as they walked. Esther made one final comment as they entered the apartment front entrance. Life isn't meant to be simple. The girls went straight to bed and fell asleep. Esther was up an hour and a half before Day. She had canvassed the refrigerator and then rode her Ninja to her father's store for a few needed breakfast items. After returning, she prepared breakfast biscuits and the other breakfast items before exercising. Day and Mary slept while Esther was enjoying the early morning hours of her day. Esther showered and quickly returned to the kitchen to prepare breakfast. Sliced ham, biscuits, rice with peppers, and eggs over easy. The breakfast aromas quickly filled the apartment as Day and Mary awoke to the wonderful aromas. Day showered and came out of the bedroom to find Esther. Is there anything that I can do for you, Esther? Esther looked up from the stove. Good morning, Day. Please find Mary's plates and set the table with large plates, forks, and knives. Mary came to the kitchen within seconds of Day. Good morning, girls, said Mary. She quickly added, Oh my gosh, my kitchen has never smelled this good. What are you making? Esther smiled. My father had a good friend who had served in the Marines. This is his favorite meal. Butter biscuits, rice, soft eggs, and breakfast ham. Esther smiled and added, I had a feeling that you would agree with this. Who wouldn't? Asked Mary. Is there anything that I can help with? Said Mary. Esther was about to answer when the doorbell rang. Oops, said Mary. Seems early for a visitor. Mary then walked to the entrance, took a peek out the security glass, and then opened the door. San, good morning to you, said Mary. What can I do for you this morning? The young Korean man that Day and Esther had met the night before was standing at the entrance. He was dressed in an attractive suit, dark black wool material, and was smiling ear to ear. Hi, Mary. I am so sorry to interfere with your morning schedule, but I met your house guests last night and wanted to assure them that I am not as weird as they might think. I must have slipped through this, said Mary. Why don't you come inside? Mary led the young man to the kitchen. Girls, this is our neighbor, San Kim. He's a good guy. He works for Fermilab. San is a research physicist. Esther looked up and said, Good morning, San. Esther had weeks before researched all of Mary's neighbors and knew who San was. Esther always tried to know and understand the environments that she would enter. The internet made this a simple procedure. Day took a look and was immediately surprised and then commented, "You're up early." Esther explained to Mary that they had met San the night before while he was appreciating her ninja motorcycle. Esther then asked Mary, "Perhaps San would like to join us for breakfast. We have plenty." Mary was not blind to San's watching Day and how they seemed to have an attraction between them, although a slight one. "How about it, San?" asked Mary. "Would you like to join us for breakfast?" San stood motionless for a moment, then said, "If I turned down that offer, I'd be crazy." San smiled and said, "Thank you so much. I must be at work by 9, but it is still very early." San sat across from Day and had a problem keeping his eyes off her. Esther and Mary found this amusing. Esther asked San, "So what are your plans for the future?" Esther was sounding a bit like a parent protecting her interest of her child. San looked at Esther. Well, I love science. I want to continue my research at Fermilab." Esther asked San, knowing the answer, "Tell me, San, when did you earn your doctorate?" San suddenly was distracted from Day and started to talk about his work. "For the last 3 years, I have helped find the Higgs boson. That will most likely earn my colleagues a Nobel Prize, and I'll have my doctorate in elementary particles." This was such a rewarding experience. San then explained how the research had narrowed the search down until they found the Higgs boson and confirmed it through double-checking the programs. They stopped talking. San stopped talking. "Perhaps I gave a greater explanation than what was needed." He smiled, then added, "I love my work." They grinned and quickly said, "When you love your work, you never have to work." They grinned. "Well, they say something like that." San smiled, commenting, "And they are right. I wake up every morning excited to go to Fermilab and do the research that we are working on." San was eating while talking and eventually said, "Wow, this is the best breakfast that I have ever had." He looked at Mary and she immediately told him, "Esther is our chef. I could never create flavors of this caliber." San turned to Esther and commented, "I've eaten in some really nice restaurants, and I have never had anything this wonderful." Esther smiled in appreciation and said, "Thank you, San. Cooking wonderful flavors is my passion in life." San then said, "Having breakfast with 3 such wonderful women has been more than I had expected, and certainly a day that I'll never forget. However, I regret my job demands that I must leave." San then turned to Day and asked, "Wonder if you might see me to the door?" Day was caught off guard, yet quickly responded, "Sure." At the entryway, San handed Day a small card, hugged her, and then left. Day came back to the table smiling. "Well," Day said, "San wants to see me." Day added, "On a date." Esther grinned, as did Mary. "Oh, what do you think, Day?" asked Esther. "I think that I love my life just as it is." Day hesitated, then added, "I just don't think I want a man in my life right now." Esther smiled as she started to grab some dishes and headed to the sink. They quickly asked Esther, before she had time to leave the table, "Esther, what do you think?" Esther placed the dishes in the sink and quickly returned to the table, gathering more dishes. "Well," Esther started, he seems nice." Esther smiled. "You know that our lives will always evolve into something different. The question you should ask yourself is whether or not this is a good direction." Mary was listening closely. "Well," said Mary. "Esther, I couldn't agree more. I believe that nothing ventured, nothing gained." Day and Esther both looked at Mary and broke out laughing. Mary watched the two giggling and soon joined in. "Well, you know that old saying is true." Day finally stopped laughing and said, "He seems nice and I will have a date or two with him, but he is dedicated to his work, and that would put me in second place." Day looked at the girls, then added, "I don't want the man in my life to put me behind anything." Mary commented, "Wow, you seem as wise as Esther." Esther quickly said, "You're right, Day. With Sam, he would always be second to his work." Esther grabbed the last of the dishes and started to wash them in the sink. Day jumped up and grabbed a towel, quickly drying the dishes as Esther handed them to her. Mary was sitting on a large overstuffed chair, watching the girls working in complete harmony. She finally made a comment as her cat jumped into her lap. "You two work really well together. It's like clockwork," said Mary. No sooner had Mary made that comment, Esther finished with cleaning up the kitchen. Esther smiled at Mary. "Day and I make a great team. It seems that life does have a plan. I don't always agree with it, but in this case, finding my sister has been the best part of my life." Esther looked at Day. "We are so much alike, we could be twins." Esther again looked at Day. Day was listening and laughed. "I love my sister, but we are definitely not twins." Day grinned. "At least, not identical." Esther and Day immediately laughed, as did Mary. The love between these two girls was very evident, and Mary was impressed by it. Esther said to Mary, "This was really fun. I hear the W.O.W. is coming back in less than 2 weeks. Perhaps we could do this again." Mary seemed excited. "You girls are just wonderful for thinking of including me. I had a great time." Mary took a long look at Esther and Day and said, "I'll be ready." Mary smiled at the girls and seemed to be very relaxed about her answer. Esther turned to Day. "Dad is expecting us in 1 hour." Day quickly said, "Oh, we have to hurry." Day ran off to the bedroom to dress. Esther smiled at Mary and quickly followed her. The girls said their goodbyes and left on Esther's Ninja, with Day as the passenger. Esther trusted Day's ability to drive a car, but when it came to a motorcycle, Esther wanted to be in control. And I think I'll stop there. That was reading 102. Hope you enjoyed it. So until next time, be safe, take care. Thank you for listening.